Hello, my loves. I'm Ellie Frost, and I help people rapidly and radically heal and transform during and after narcissistic abuse. And I want to talk today about why you might not be healing from narcissistic abuse, right? Because so many people go through the cycle of narcissism or narcissistic abuse, and they go out and they try different things and they don't really heal. What does healing mean? I'm not affected by it anymore. I'm not suffering from it anymore. It's not replaying in my mind anymore. It's not shaping how I show up in the world anymore, right? So why don't we heal? There's lots of reasons. One is there's not really a lot of accurate stuff on how to deal with trauma, right? So trauma is the body's response. It's stored in our bodies, right? So when we're trying to out-talk it, out-think it, out-discuss it, you know what I mean, going through loads of talking therapies on this, that can actually reignite the trauma and keep re-traumatizing us, or not really getting us like much further. So talking alone, although it can be therapeutic, right? Because there is a part of our healing where we need just to be seen. And that's the biggest part of why talking therapy works, is being seen and recognized, and being able to have a connection around sharing our pain can bring some relief. But the trauma still often lives in us, right? So there's a few things we need to do to heal trauma. One is raise our consciousness. 2 is get it out of our bodies, right? 3 is, how do you process it? You kind of allow the body to process the emotions. And I've got lots of ways of doing that through energy work, right? But the trauma is still alive. If you haven't healed, the trauma is still alive, right? Another thing is, we may not have the skills, right? The personal development skills to evolve from this situation. Right? What do I mean by that? Well, look, my work combines healing with personal development and growth, right? My background is not just in healing modalities, but in actual coaching people, right? And coaching is part of self-development. So it's not just I have to commit to healing work, it's that I have to be committed to being the best version of me, right? So if I'm not doing that, and I don't know how to do that, then I tend to be stuck in the version of me where I was, just without the narcissist in my life. But I'm still in self-doubt, I'm still in self-hatred, I'm still in insecurity, I'm still scared of people, I'm still working in defense, I'm still not setting good boundaries, I'm still not living in alignment with my values and who I really am. You know, I'm still acting like the victim of abuse. You are a victim of abuse, by the way. This is not victim shaming. I talk about that all the time. But I haven't got the skills, the life strategies, the emotional intelligence skills, right? Which we're not taught at school, and we should be, to rebuild myself, right? So we want to do healing modalities. Healing is about alleviating pain, alleviating suffering. And at the same time, we want to learn self-development strategies so we can achieve our goals, so we can be true to ourselves, so we can feel the fullness of who we are and our potential. And doing that together, right, equals transformation, which is why I don't just talk about healing, I talk about heal and transform, right? The version of you that would never tolerate this type of abuse, right, is the transformed one. The healed one is one that isn't suffering anymore, but may not have done the transformation work in order to self-actualize, come into our truest, fullest self, right? So we have to understand that after being through narcissistic abuse, right, we have been trained and brainwashed in a certain way. And that doesn't just go away when the narcissist does. We carry those behaviors into our new relationships and into our new life. Or what we'll do quite often, which I've done for years, you know, after narcissistic abuse, is we will literally try and protect ourselves from everything and everyone, right? Because we don't feel confident enough to be around people intimately, right? Because we've had the worst happen to us over and over again sometimes, I know I did, that we will be in defense all the time. So we'll now be too scared to go forward. We'll be too scared to follow our hearts. We'll be too scared to take risks, right? Because we're still so traumatized. So one other way to get rid of trauma is to have an experience that's the opposite of what we've had, right? There's nothing more healing than love and empathy on this planet. There's nothing more healing than it. And love doesn't just mean love from other people, and doesn't just mean self-love. It means doing things we love, feeling loved by the universe, feeling, living a life we love. This can feel unimaginable after narcissistic abuse, right? Because most of us have gone into such survival mode that our only goal at that point, right, is just to survive. It's just to survive. For me personally, having studied healing modalities and been a healer for years, but also studying personal development strategies and being a coach for years, what I found fascinating was, and it happened in my life as well, was when you apply just coaching principles to someone who's very heavily traumatized, they won't work. In fact, they can be counterproductive to that person, because the things you're taught in personal development sometimes will accentuate the trauma in you. So this is why this is a dual process that I do with people. It's got to be healing, and it's got to be personal development and spiritual. I would call it spiritual growth, but you don't have to be what you consider a spiritual person to be signed up to your spiritual growth. All that means is you're signed up to your potential and evolution and personal power, right? Because what personal development teaches us is personal power and autonomy. But some of the teachings can be counterproductive for people who have suffered abuse, because it will teach you things like you're responsible for everything and you're accountable for everything. And when you've been abused, guess what? It wasn't your fault. You're not to blame. You're not just a victim. You've been victimized, right? So personal responsibility is great, but we tend to, when you've been abused, we tend to blame ourselves way too much. And our problem isn't personal responsibility. It's that we are taking too much responsibility for an abuser. We're too focused often when we've been through narcissistic abuse on looking what I could have said or what I could have done or what I'm doing wrong, because the narcissist has made you think that you're the problem. So we tend to be overly concerned with what we're doing wrong rather than overly concerned with making that person accountable for their actions, right? So we've got to see it as a two-level thing, because if you just go through some kind of healing but don't transform your life, you're going to feel pretty empty, right, after the abuse. Is that, what now? Right? So it is like a self-actualization means coming home to ourselves, being true to ourselves, being true to what we want and need. Now, in narcissistic abuse, we have been taught not to want and need anything. In fact, to shape our lives all around the wants and needs of the narcissist or narcissist, if you've had several of them in your life, which I have. Right? So my training from a child was to shape myself around other people, be really good at keeping a lot of people happy, right? And that was me doing a good job. But in the whole part of that was a complete human sacrifice of self, right? And then to feel safe in getting my boundaries and my needs and wants met took a bit of work. And when I first started speaking up for myself, I went a little bit far sometimes. There's some times where I can look back and say, oh God, that's not who I want to be, because I was learning and finding my feet, but I was still progressing. Right? So we want to progress. If we just isolate and hold ourselves back from the world, we don't progress there, because we're not in relationship with anything, right? So we've got to give ourselves the grace to be on this journey, but we've got to understand that this isn't just about getting through something. And the other side doesn't always, it doesn't always mean that everything's going to fall into place. For some people it will, right? Because once you've left the narcissist, you would have done some work on yourself. You will see the world differently. You'd have taken your power back, right? In some way, and things will elevate. But guess what, right? Things can elevate more than you can possibly imagine. So part of my course, Sovereign, right? I don't just teach healing, there's healing and energy work in there. There's practical principles and trainings and that kind of stuff. But then there's also, I teach about manifestation, creating your best life, right? When we are with the narcissist, we're just in survival. And that is a lower state of consciousness. We may be focused. I know I was still focused on creating my best life, and I did manifest and create, some things even during narcissistic abuse, but it wasn't really, it was constantly limited because I was constantly being disempowered, right? And that constant disempowerment from narcissistic abuse has to put you in a lower state of consciousness, right? And that lower state of consciousness attracts lower vibrational things into your life. Right? This is quantum physics. So we want to be concerned with doing these two things at once. Healing the wounds, right? Which is mainly around processing emotions. It's mainly around letting the body get those emotions out. And I've got tools that you can use that will help you do that. Processing the emotions, right? Which doesn't have to take a ton of time. And as I say, sometimes just talking about it doesn't process the emotion. Yeah? We think that talking about it will get rid of it. But what we find is it rarely does. And then the thoughts come back and the situation comes back, and that's the CPTSD or the PTSD, right? Because the body still hasn't processed it. Do you have, like some people teach, to go back to very stressful environment or situations in order to do this? I don't think you need to do that at all, right? You just have to feel into and use, the energy of what's stuck inside of you and let that process out. Give it time to process out. Allow space for it to process out. It's not what happened to you that is stored in your body. It's how it made you feel, how you feel, and the subconscious programs, right, that you've made it mean about yourself and what you get to do, be, and have in the world. This is the problem of losing our power in this situation, right? Is it basically distorts our concept of self and how we get to be treated in the world, right? And what we get to achieve, right? So it's a damage on an identity level, right? When we actually learn how to not just heal the wound, but how to come into our truer, fuller identity, right? The world around us changes, and so does our expectations naturally. And we naturally love ourselves because we're being true to ourselves. We can't really love ourselves from a place of disconnection to self, right? Of sacrifice, of people pleasing, of being the doormat, of, being manipulated. On some level, we're allowing it, right? We don't realize we are, because it's very heavy when we're under the spell, but we still are giving our power away, right? So the focus I'm suggesting is not just to heal. It's to radically transform your life. All that effort you have put into being a lesser version of yourself, into pleasing the narcissist, into treading water, into grey rocking, stonewalling, thinking of your next move, trying to keep the peace, all that energy, yeah, which has probably made you sick over time because it burns you out. But, all that energy could be put into being the best version of you, right? But the narcissist doesn't want you to be the best version of you. They want the beaten down one. And actually, you'll notice in narcissistic abuse, when you're at your most, what people call broken, is when they'll go in hardest at you. Often when you're sick, when you're unwell, when you're traumatized, this is when they'll try and break you down even further, because the more broken down you are, the easier you are to control. And when you leave a narcissist or narcissist, there can be a big hole in your life because you have been a servant and you don't have a master anymore. Right? And that can feel like freedom, or it can feel extremely daunting because you don't have a clear sense of purpose. You're not used to serving your own needs, right? And when you serve your own needs, I'm not talking about at the expense of others, right? This is not selfishness. Selfishness is when we're doing something at the complete expense of other people. But we have to learn, right, how to actually put ourselves first. And we don't know what that means, right? After being trained into putting other people first. Now, should you still care about other people? Yes. The most fulfilling part of life is to actually serve people, right? But not as a form of self-sacrifice. So there's a dance in this, right? Because what most of us have done is, in order to help and serve other people, we have sacrificed ourselves. As soon as we do that, there's a problem, right? So we can help other people, we can celebrate other people, we can inspire other people, we can love other people, we can do so much for other people, right? But we have to be doing it for ourselves too. And healthy relationships come from that. And actually, in healthy relationships, what we're looking for is to become more of ourselves. What I teach people how to do is become more of yourself, to expand yourself, right? To stop limiting yourself. You had to become a shell of yourself, right? To survive narcissistic abuse, right? And, there is this idea of like Stockholm syndrome and, all these things that happen to us psychologically when we've been a prisoner for so long. And it is like being a prisoner, right? When you're with a narcissist. So like, we don't know what to do with the freedom. We don't trust ourselves, right? We've been giving our power away to the narcissist. They've been telling us who we are, what we get to do, be, and have a lot of the time. Yeah. Now we've got all this responsibility, all this autonomy. And it can be a little bit destabilizing to start with, right? And then we've got to be brave enough, yeah, to go out in the world in a truer way, show our real selves. You know, it's painful not to be seen, heard, and recognized. And that's part of the pain of narcissistic abuse. But it is scary when you have to be brave enough to let people really see you, knowing that sometimes you're going to get it wrong. Sometimes they're not going to like you, right? We kind of avoid that with a narcissist because we know they don't really like us on some level. You know what I mean? They treat us badly. But like, you know, being loved for who you really are can feel scarier on some level than being loved for someone you're not. Because when you're with a narcissist, you're being loved, but you're not even loved. There's no love from a narcissist. But when you're being someone you're not, it's kind of a protection thing. When you're being all of you, you're very vulnerable, right? But it's the most freeing, amazing, empowering, magnetizing, awesome experience. It's what you came for on the planet, to be seen, heard, loved, validated just for who you are. And when we give the power of, you know, receiving that to a narcissist, right, we're totally giving the opportunity to have those things away. So we get trained into self-abandonment, we get trained into self-sacrifice, right? Now we've got to train ourselves into self-actualization, coming home and being the truest, most abundant, most fulfilled, most happy version of ourselves. A lot of us don't know how to be happy, not truly happy, right? We think it's safer to be hidden. We think it's safer to be unfulfilled in some ways, right? Because we've been punished by the narcissist for our joy. We've been punished for being light. We've been punished for being as big as we are in our energy, right? All those things. I mean, I know I grew up with narcissists, you know, they were stamped out of me. I thought something terrible would happen if I would be fully myself. And so many times terrible things did happen from me being fully myself. Not because that's how the universe works, because that's how narcissists treat truly authentic people. Right? Which is why truly authentic people that are in their power don't hang out with them, right? Truly authentic people in their power aren't a match for a narcissist, right? Or not for very long. So we have to understand that in order to survive this abuse, we haven't been able to be truly authentic. But in order to feel happy and fulfilled on the planet, we have to be truly authentic, right? And when we are truly authentic, we learn how to communicate our wants, needs and desires, learn how to be safe with that vulnerability, learn who to share to, when to share, what's oversharing, what's undersharing. You know, we have to learn all these skills. They're all new to us, right? When I first got out of narcissistic abuse, I tend to not share anything about myself because I was in defense, or massively overshare inappropriately because I was just so desperate to be seen or heard by someone, right? So I had to learn what was appropriate, what wasn't appropriate, the balance, because when you overshare with someone, it's overwhelming. And also if you overshare your vulnerabilities, some people are looking to trauma bond you, right? So it can be dangerous. So there's lots of things we have to learn coming out of this, right? And I think one of the biggest things we underestimate is how much we've given ourselves away and our power away. We thought we were in our power. Especially if we think, oh, I've been stonewalling, I've been grey rocking, I've been managing the narcissist, I'm keeping the peace. They're not, you know, but you're still allowing yourself to be someone you're not, because it's not normal to live like that. Well, it's not healthy to live like that for very long. Right? I'm not saying they're not good strategies, they are, but ideally we don't want to be around people we have to do that with. We want to be around people we can be celebrated and fully ourselves with. Is this always possible? Look, not with everyone. You know, your boss could be a narcissist and you might want to stay in your job, in which case you've got to use certain strategies. But you want the majority of your relationships to be connected ones where you do get to be fully yourselves. And actually, when you insist on that in life, you might choose to get another job where you are valued and loved. Because what is the point otherwise? What is the point of being around people if they don't validate, love, care for, recognize, see you? What's the point of being that punching bag? What is the point? Yeah. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. I hope you like this video. Lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon.